Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. Hare Krishna, everyone. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Najatu Kauravendranam Dordanda Parirambhite Bhutale Nyupatanti Yasmin Vinate Praninam Shuchaha Najatu Kauravendranam Dordanda Parirambhite Bhutale Nyupatantyasmin Vinate Praninam Suchaha. Today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 17, Text 8. The translation. Sorry, before that, the synonyms. Now, not. Jatu, at any time. Kaurva Indranam, of the kings in the Kuru dynasty. Dordanda, strength of arms. Parirambhite, protected by. Bhutale, on the surface of the earth. Anupatanti, grieving. Asmin, up till now. Vina, save and accept. Te, you. Praninam, of the living being. Shuchaha, tears in the eyes. Translation. Now, for the first time in a kingdom well protected by the arms of the kings of the Kuru dynasty, I see you grieving with tears in your eyes. Up till now, no one on earth has ever shed tears because of royal negligence. Let me read that again. Translation. Now, for the first time in a kingdom well protected by the arms of the kings of the Kuru dynasty, I see you grieving with tears in your eyes. Up till now, no one on earth has ever shed tears because of royal negligence. Purport. By His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The protection of the lives of both the human beings and the animals is the first and foremost duty of a government. A government must not discriminate in such principles. It is simply horrible for a pure-hearted soul to see organized animal killing by the state in this age of Kali. Maharaj Parikshit was lamenting for the tears in the eyes of the bull, and he was astonished to see such an unprecedented thing in his good kingdom. Men and animals were equally protected as far as life was concerned. That is the way in God's kingdom. So once again, we're reading from Canto 1, Chapter 17, Text 8. Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is certainly a wonderful service and an opportunity for me to be able to share a few thoughts, a few words, and again, none of my own, but what I've heard from my preceptors. So if I'm saying something wrong or something that is not in line with the scriptures, I stand corrected. So please forgive me. So a little backdrop. Maharaj, first of all, let me offer my prayers as well. Om Agnana Timrandasya Glananjana Shalakya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So a little backdrop, a little context here in terms of where we are. So Maharaj Parikshit is basically at the scene where Dharma the bull is being literally abused not just literally, but physically abused by Kali personified. And three of his four legs for the bull I'm talking about, were completely broken by Kali. And the fourth one was also about to go. So this also signifies the advent of Kali, as we've been reading over the last several days, weeks as well. In Satya Yuga, religious principles were governed by austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. So of these, the three legs that we are referring to in terms of Dharma, the bull's legs, those first three are gone. Only truthfulness is left. How, with only truthfulness left, and also the fourth leg, as you're seeing it, as we're reading it, Dharma, the bull's leg, the fourth leg is also very weak. The bull is actually trembling in fear because three legs have already gone and they've been broken mercilessly by Kali. And so the fourth leg is about to go. So Dharma, the bull, is in total trepidation and, standing very weakly at this point. And you can imagine an animal that has four legs is now standing on just one leg, right? So it is trembling. So even the fourth one is about to fall. It's weak and it's shaking. So Maharaj Parikshit is at the scene, and he's completely devastated, looking at what is happening right in front of his eyes. And Maharaj Parikshit, like any good king would do, would routinely go throughout his kingdom, either in disguise or otherwise. And in this case, he was in his full kingly attire, where he would
Hare Krishna. Prabhu, we can't hear you. Frozen. Others here?
No, Prabhu, I also can't hear.
No, I cannot hear either.
Prabhu is joining back. You're on mute.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, we are not able to hear you.
Yeah, you're still on mute, Prabhu. Oh, I think he has internet problem.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? I'm so sorry.
Yes, Prabhu. Yeah, we can hear.
I didn't realize that when I lost connectivity, the application closed and everything had to be restarted again, and I had to reset my settings. So sorry about that. Sorry for the confusion there, but one of these technical challenges that we continue to have in our day-to-day lives, even now in this 21st century. Anyway, so here we are where Maharaj Parikshit is completely not in acceptance in terms of what he's seeing, especially in his kingdom, during his rule, during his watch. An innocent animal like this bull, which is being badly abused, bleeding, with three legs broken and bleeding so badly and trembling with fear because of even the fourth leg is about to be broken by this evil personality, Kali. that is really, signifying the advent of this Kali Yuga that we are now in, right? So that is basically, the situation. That is the context, right? And Maharaj Parikshit is so angered by the situation. He is so sad on the one hand, but on the other hand, he's so angered by the situation that he is just about to, knock this Kali's head off. So he's getting to that point, and he's asking these questions as to, who are you, Kali? Who are you dressed in kingly robes? You seem to be dressed in kingly robes, but you're doing the worst of the things that a king would never do. And then he turns around and he asks the bull, who are you? What is happening to you? Who is this perpetrator? Who is this? Tell me who it is. Just tell me one word and I'm going to knock his head off. I'm going to kill him, right? So he's so angry. And that is the situation. And we are at in this particular verse, Maharaj Parikshit is addressing the bull and also saying that, this never happens or has never happened before, especially, during the dynasty of the Kurus. They've always protected all of its citizens. And all of its citizens means not only human beings, but all living entities, right? That include animals as well. Innocent animals, especially, right? So Maharaj Parikshit is addressing the bull, and so that's what we're going to be discussing for the next half hour or so. So please bear with me as we get through this. So some of the excerpts that, I found a few references where Prabhupada has, spoken about this. He's spoken about this in many, many, many different places, in many different contexts, in terms of how the government is so important in the sense that they should be taking the responsibility of being in power and really protecting their citizens, right, or its citizens. And now, in the context of Maharaj Parikshit, it was a time when it was not a democratic government, but it was more the administration through the rule of the king, right? And Maharaj Parikshit was the emperor of the entire earthly planet, all right? So Bharatvarsha, as it was known then. So the responsibilities that were held up during that time were completely superlative in terms of how well they protected their citizens and how well they upheld, the religious principles. So Srila Prabhupada has spoken about this at many times, in different for different audiences in different contexts as well. But so I pulled out a few excerpts that I could find that were relevant to our discussion today. So one of the things that is mentioned in Srila Prabhupada's Leelamrita, where Srila Prabhupada is quoted as saying, the leaders of nation have opened many factories for manufacturing weapons for the art of killing, but none has opened a factory to manufacture weapons for protecting man from the cruel hands of death, although a wishful desire is always not to die, right? Which is very true, right? We're always seeing how governments are constantly, getting into this arms race. They're talking about nuclear weapons. They're talking about stockpiling of these weapons. They're talking about chemical weapons. In fact, there's this whole conspiracy theory that's going on that this whole pandemic is also caused by a nation, to further biological warfare. And countries are, it's pretty well known, it's an accepted fact that a lot of the countries, developed countries, are already, they have been producing biological weapons for quite some time now. Not just, in the last couple of years, but it's been happening over the last 50, 60, 70 years as well, right? So these are things that are happening. And so we're seeing governments actually spending huge budgets, right? Defense budgets, now that they have to protect themselves against weapons that are being produced by the other side. And they themselves are also producing weapons of mass destruction. So they should instead be focused on protecting their citizens and getting them, and helping them from getting away from death, basically. So how do you prolong life and longevity and those kinds of things? How do you improve the quality of life? That should be the real goal. But as Prabhupada very clearly, even then, when Prabhupada, even during Prabhupada's time and even before that, right? So Prabhupada is mentioning how governments are investing so much in terms of manufacturing weapons of mass destruction. Another quote from Prabhupada, he says, and this is in reference to what was happening right after World War II, right? We're pleased to find that the leaders of world politics, such as Mr. Churchill, have nowadays begun to think of a humane world and trying to get rid of the terrible national frenzy of hate. I repeat, terrible national frenzy of hate. The frenzy of hatred is another side of the frenzy of love. The frenzy of love of Hitler's own countrymen was produced or has produced the concomitant frenzy of hatred for others, and the present war is the result of such dual side of a frenzy called love and hatred. So what he's referring to here, Prabhupada was talking about how on the one hand, there was a frenzy of hatred that the Nazis had propagated, killing all these millions of innocent Jews and innocent people. It was genocide, right? So it was basically the leader had promoted so much hatred that an entire community was being eliminated very systematically and very mercilessly, right? So it's a very, very sad and unfortunate thing that happened in our recent history that we really don't want to recall. And on the other hand, Prabhupada is referring to the frenzy of love. And what does he mean by that? Frenzy of love being, Hitler being, favorable to just his race, right? The race of the Aryans and the blue-eyed and the black-haired, fair-skinned people that he was trying to protect. So this was a frenzy of love. So on the one hand, he was, favoring his own people. On the other hand, he was killing. Again, part of the same humanity, right? Just because they look different. So this position, and again, Prabhupada says, this position of equilibrium free from love and hatred is attained only when men are sufficiently educated. So there was another room conversation where Prabhupada had a conversation with Dr. Christian Hauser, who was a very well-known psychologist. And in that he was quoted as saying, Russia, the leaders, not only in Russia, and I'm reading it directly, quote unquote, as Prabhupada said it. Russia, the leaders, not only in Russia, everywhere. The leaders, the rascal leaders, spoiling the whole world situation. In India also, in India, by nature, they are aloof from these four principles of sinful life. So the four principles he was talking about, he was referring to were like intoxication, prostitution, gambling, and falsity. These were the big ones, right? So he said in India, by nature, they're aloof from these four principles of sinful life. 80% of the population by nature. But government, at the present moment, the leaders, they're inducing them to eat meat, to drink, and gambling also. And gambling also, like Nixon, has gone to the power. Now he's proved he's a rascal. So everywhere the government leaders means all rascals. Take, for example, the cows. If the master is Krishna conscious, they're not killed. Very simple example that Srila Prabhupada is making here. Just take, for example, the cows. If the master is Krishna conscious, they're not killed. And if the master is a rogue, they're killed. They have no knowledge how to protect themselves, naturally, because cows are very innocent, right? They take shelter of a master. So if the master is good, then their life is safe. And if the master is a rogue, then they are killed. So it requires the leader. Formerly, the kings were saintly, Rajarshi. Therefore, there was peace. You cannot expect the mass of people, to be very intelligent. That is not possible. They're generally in darkness. They believe that somebody, this man, will give us protection. But the man is treacherous. He sits on the post of giving protection, but he kills. This is going on. Therefore, if the leaders become nice, Krishna conscious, then everything will be right. These rogues, by force, by device, they all occupy the government post. And we see that all too often, right? I mean, some of us, even growing up in India, back during our college days, the folks that really ran for office were the ones who really couldn't make it through, even one semester, through all of the subjects that they were taking, the courses that they were taking with a pass grade, right? So these were guys who had time that they wasted away, and they used it for all the wrong things, right? They would intimidate people, they would bully other students, their fellow students and others. They would be involved in ragging, they would be involved in hazing, they would be involved in all of these, crazy things that were not becoming of any good student. And they would hardly attend class. And even if they were in class, they would be disruptive, right? And these were the same people who then, after college, with broken degrees, or with unsuccessful degrees, I should say, they made it into the government with positions that were actually supposed to be protecting their citizens and improving their quality of life, and that never happened, right? We see a vast majority that was happening and continues to happen, not only in the governments of India, the government of India, but you see that happening in other governments as well. So again, not to get political here, but since this text is so focused on how the protection of the government, the protection by the government of the people is so very important. So I will be citing some examples, that we can all relate to. So please, hopefully that's not going to be offending anybody, but, this is not one person versus the other, or one government versus the other, but in general, when we speak about governments, we're talking about in general, governments tend to be defunct in terms of their responsibility, in terms of what they're doing. So just continuing on what Prabhupada was saying. So formerly Vedic, the king was trained up very nicely by the Brahmanas, guided by the Brahmanas, and they would do nicely. Now thousands of kings. The president, the secretary, the minister, the senator, everyone is king. So Prabhupada is saying now there are thousands of kings. Before there was only one king that would have control over and jurisdiction over a large area. It could be, and in Parikshit Maharaj's case, it was the planet, the entire planet itself, Bharatvarsha. But now Prabhupada is saying there are thousands of kings, thousands. The president, the secretary, the minister, the senator, everyone is king. Because everyone is in the business of exploitation. That's all. Formerly, there was one king. Now, in the name of democracy, there are thousands of kings. And the poor citizens, they have to satisfy all of them. So it is a duty of the government to reestablish social order in terms of occupational duties, varnashrama, and the modes of material nature, for that will make the entire world population actually civilized. If it does not observe the institutional functions of the four social orders, human society is no better than animal society. So Prabhupada is saying this, it's still quote unquote. In which there is never tranquility, peace, prosperity, but only chaos and confusion. Okay, so that ends Prabhupada's quote there. So in today's world, there's no such thing as protection, right? So leave alone innocent animals that are being slaughtered by the tens, if not by the hundreds of thousands around the world. Even the common citizen is not protected. And we see this even in the wake of this pandemic. This is the most recent crisis that we can all relate to. We're still going through it, right? We thought it was over. And then again came the Delta variant, and now everything is, still in a state of chaos, a total crisis. So each to his own, starting from the leaders of the government, everybody is just trying to take care of themselves and their own agenda, right? So the common man's life is of no value to these, important so-called government administrators, right? So especially during this pandemic, we see, the media, the news showing us graphic pictures and videos of how migrant workers have been, walking back from the cities. They have to walk for many, many, many miles because they don't have the money. They are the ones who, earn on a daily basis, and it just takes care of their daily sustenance. That's it. It's not like that they have enough money for the next day or the following day or the following day. No. As we know it, these workers are so, so below the line of poverty that, they have to work for the day. And if they don't work, they don't have money. And if they don't have money, they cannot put food on the table. So that is applied to these migrant workers, which we, most of us are aware of. But for, folks who've been living here in the US, that may be something that, is something new to, some of you. But that's the sad plight in a lot of the developing countries, right? So you have this dichotomy of extremely poor, and then you also have the extremely rich, right? So the top 1% of the world's richest people, for instance, or top 5%, I take that back, top 5% of the world's richest people in the world, right? They come from India, for instance. So there are a lot of rich people. So if you look at the top Fortune, the Fortune magazine usually ranks on an annual basis, you'll see a lot of people from India that are super, super rich, like the Ambanis of the world, right? And they are among the richest in the world, right? With the Bill Gates and all of the others. Anyway, so we have that dichotomy. Now, talking about these migrant workers, these poor folks, with the pandemic, there are no jobs left in the city for them. So they're trying to go back to their villages from where they came from. They came from the villages to the cities looking for work. And here they are, because of the pandemic, now they're literally forced to, go back to their villages and go back to, a life that has a lot of uncertainties. So along the way, these people are walking with their, little ones, with whatever life's belongings on their heads. Just, look at that, the plight of these workers who are trying to travel back, the hot sun, they don't have food, they don't get enough facilities for, clean drinking water and things like that. And they're walking not just 1 or 2 miles, they're talking about several miles, sometimes 30, 40, 50, even 100 miles. So they're walking, and some of them are getting even, run over by, road traffic, because the roads are quite narrow, and then you have traffic that is so negligent, right? Just like the government. So you see that happening, and then you see, mothers having to take care of their babies and, the infants, the children, all of this with the total uncertainty that they may not even get food. And so this is happening, right? And then we also, and what is the government doing to, help these people? Now, you can argue both ways. You'll see governments taking care of, certain people below the poverty line, but they are providing some basic necessities. As of at least recently, they're providing some rice and some, grains and things like that, so people are not starving to death. But that's only a small minority. There is a vast majority that has been suffering and continues to suffer. And on the other hand, when you look at it, the government has also been very negligent in terms of being able to build out adequate infrastructure facilities, right? They're supposed to be, especially with all of this happening, and this is now a global economy, right? And we are a very connected world now. When you look at it, what's happening in, let's say, in China or India or in America or in other places or other countries, the news travels fast. It's not like the governments are unaware of what's happening in the other country, right? And then there's a lot of, leave intelligence out. Even standard, general news is available. It's just available at their fingertips. So certain governments have even refused to accept the pandemic as a true reality. Okay, so that in itself is total negligence. Then on top of that, you have governments that are not building out, even if they accept the pandemic, knowing that this is something that is something that they need to be prepared for, to be able to take care of, patients as they come in. The infrastructural capabilities are close to nothing, very, very minimal, right? So hospitals and the whole hospital system, the healthcare system is on the verge of a complete breakdown in many countries. So not just in India, but in many, many, many countries. Now, even more recently, look at the situation in Afghanistan, right? with America, after spending billions of dollars and spending over 2 decades, taking care of them, training them, equipping them, and doing everything that America as a country could do along with its allies for the lives of the Afghanis. When it was time for America to make the move and withdraw its troops and come back, what happened? We're seeing Afghanistan, which is in a total state of chaos. There is no certainty for anybody out there, right? And so there are people that are being killed. There's a Taliban that's already come in, so there are terrorist groups that have also, taken that opportunity. So that's one of the lessons we've been learning in the Srimad Bhagavatam as well, where, when the king moves out, it gives rise to a lot of these miscreants to come in and occupy that space and cause all kinds of disturbances for all the innocent and the good people, right? So we'll discuss a little more of that in Srimad Bhagavatam's context as, in the next few minutes. So we're seeing women with little children and infants in total distress, not knowing where to go or if they will receive any protection of any kind, right? And in all this, you see in Afghanistan, where is the government? It's a complete breakdown of the government, right? The army has completely disbanded. They've literally dropped all of their weapons and everything. So now it is free for all. Practically, the terrorist groups are getting in and taking all of the equipment that, the billions of dollars that have been supplied by America and other countries as well. And guess what? That is now, being used against their own people. What was provided in the first case to protect these people is now being used against these people. So it is a very, very sad situation that they are in. And guess what? The first person or the first set of people that actually folks that fled from the country was the heads of the government, right? So that is a real sad plight. They're supposed to be there and actually, fighting for their people and keeping these miscreants out. And perhaps even, soliciting external help, but rather they just left. In fact, the president of Afghanistan left with just the shirt on his back with his family. He was the first one to leave. So that's the sad situation. Anyway, so this has been going on. It's not just the first time, and perhaps it's not going to be the last time either. But we see these kinds of atrocities that have been happening routinely, even in the past, right? We've seen even during the 30s and the early 40s, how the Jews were discriminated against, and how they were being systematically killed, and all because the leader was completely misplaced, right? There were no religious principles as such that they were following, right? So this frenzy of love has to be very carefully thought through, right? This whole nationalism and this favoritism has to be thought through very carefully. We have to take that very seriously because it starts at the grassroots level. If we don't believe in the right things and practice that in setting the right example, starting from from within ourselves, that extends to our families, which means our wife and children, very important, and then our extended circle, like our family, beyond our immediate family, our relatives and so on, and then our friends and our community and so on, and you just expand that all the way through the nation. So you're talking about even while we're at work, right? It just doesn't mean that we are doing one thing at home and we're doing something completely different at work. We need to get this entire environment and this culture of promoting religious principles, right? So if we believe in them and we're going, we're practicing them and doing everything that we can. I'm not saying that we're going to be perfect, from day one, but at least understanding what those religious principles are in the first place, understanding how to discriminate between what is good and what is bad, between being compassionate and being destructive. Once we start developing that from within ourselves, then it becomes easier for us, the peace formula that Prabhupada talks about. If everybody believes in that one God, and no matter which religion he or she is practicing, if they're doing it right, they believe and they're following by the, the principles that's offered by that particular path, they're all in peace and at peace with each other, right? So that's something that we need to keep in mind. Okay, so I think it's 8:11. We have another 19 minutes here before we end this class. So let's get into some story time. So there's an illustrated piece of history in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So once upon a time, there was a king. And in this case, this king was called King Vena. So King Vena was a son of a very powerful king called King Anga, and also Vena's mother was Sunita. So Anga and Sunita were very well known, reputed to be, wonderful, in terms of being able to administer and take care of their citizens, and everything was flourishing very, very well until King Anga was gone, and King Vena had to be installed as the new king. Rather, Vena was sort of going to be installed as the new king. And so when that happened, and this was done by the Brahmanas, by the way, they installed Vena as the king, knowing that Vena was not really a very good person. He tended to be, a little loose here, there, and everywhere. And so after he became king, it didn't just stop there. He basically started, the whole the whole glory of being in power was getting to him, was driving him down a path where he was starting to abuse his power left, right, and center. Right. So there were a lot of bad things that were happening. He even went to the extent of stopping sacrifices, and telling the Brahmanas that, hey, you don't even need to perform any sacrifices. Not just that. As things started, progressing downward, it got to a point where King Vena actually told the Brahmanas, think of me, worship me. Why are you worshiping anybody else? I am the embodiment of all the demigods. So this angered the Brahmanas like crazy. I mean, first he stops us from performing sacrifices. He is not performing his duty as a king should. He is not taking care of his, citizens. There are so many bad things that are happening throughout the kingdom, and now he's telling us that he should be worshipped, and not just being worshipped. He is saying that he is the embodiment of all the demigods. So this is something completely unacceptable for the Brahmanas, as you would expect, right? And these were great sages that you're talking about. And when that happened, Vena took it to another level, being Vena. He said, okay, I am like Krishna. So you don't even have to worry about, or don't even bother performing any sacrifices to the Yajna-purusha, who's Krishna himself. Instead, you worship me. I'm not only the embodiment of all the, devatas, the demigods, but also Krishna himself. And that was it. That was it. That was a breaking point. At that point, the sages, using their powerful mantras, just killed King Vena on the spot. Now, that was a good thing, right? So King Vena was killed. That's the good part. And Mother Sunita, his mother, was so attached to him that she, refused to cremate the body or bury the body. So she had the body with, special, oils and things like that to preserve the body, which we've even heard, not heard, but we've seen evidence of how the Egyptians have mummified their bodies. But in this case, the body was actually preserved in a very lively form, so to speak. All right. So now what happened was, just like we mentioned earlier when I was talking about how when a person of responsibility moves away, when the government goes away, what happens? Miscreants come in. It creates an opportunity, a very, very easy opportunity for miscreants to come in, like terrorists, right? So in this case, during that particular time, when Vena was dead, thieves and robbers and all kinds of other miscreants moved into the kingdom and started literally abusing all of the citizens, right? So the citizens were in total despair as to what to do. They were trying to protect themselves. They were hiding. They were doing everything they could to stay away from these miscreants. So noticing all of this, the sages were feeling, the brahmanas were very, very upset with themselves, because they felt like, hey, we were responsible for installing King Veena, and that didn't work out. And now, when that didn't work out, we killed King Veena and got him out of there. But now look at this. We have a newer problem that is also equally painful. So it was like ants trapped in a burning wooden log that's burning from both sides, right? Think of that situation. So on the one hand, King Veena was gone, right? And so they didn't have a king to rule over them and to govern and take care of them. On the other hand, you had these miscreants that, these thieves and criminals and robbers and so on, who were, creating a lot of disturbance for the common man. So looking at this, the Brahmanas decided to do one thing. They said, okay, so if we can use mantras to kill King Veena, we can also use our mantras to do something good, right? So what they did was they started to churn the thighs of King Veena with their mantras. And from those powerful mantras came this short, dwarf-like human with very, very short limbs, fiery red eyes, and a very, very dark skin. And dark skin to the point that almost like a crow, right? The color of a crow. But the good part is that these were done with the right intent. So this particular entity that the Brahmanas conjured up, using their mantras, was very, very obedient to the Brahmanas. So whatever the Brahmanas would say, he would do it. It was not like he was an evil person, but he was willing to do whatever the Brahmanas wanted him to do. And they named him Bahuka, I believe. That was the name that was given to him. So they told him, okay, Bahuka, try and not try, but you will be, given all the possible, all the sinful things that people crave for will be in you. So you will, in other words, in a sense, become the storehouse of all of these sinful things that will attract all of these thieves and criminals and all of the other folks who are wanting to indulge in these kinds of sinful activities. And this is going to be you, the storehouse, and you please go to a place where you're far away from these good citizens, from the normal citizen within the kingdom. That way, all of these bad influences will come to your place. That way, we can protect the innocent. Now, they didn't stop at that, and they continued to offer their prayers, their mantras, and they churned this time the arms of King Veena. So from that came a male and a female set of entities, and they were none other than the plenary expansions of Krishna himself, right, through Vishnu. And that was the male was named Prithu, and the female was named Achi by the sages. So in due course of time, Prithu had mastered all of the religious principles, and he was such a wonderful, 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 a devotee of the Lord. And Achi was equally, a fantastic devotee of the Lord. And so Prithu was then coronated as the emperor of the world at that point, right? And Achi was married to him. She was the goddess of Lakshmi, goddess of fortune, Lakshmi herself, right? So now this was going very, very well until at one point in time, there was, I'm trying to fast forward here, where there was a famine in the kingdom. And this famine brought, it was inexplicable, because under a good king, generally speaking, the fortune is very, very good. Everything is blooming, blossoming, there's plentiful, grains are in plentiful, and everything is available to everybody. Practically everybody is happy there. But there was this one instance that, a famine happened, and the famine continued for an extended period of time. And this caused great concern for Maharaj Prithu. So he was trying to figure this out, and then, even the citizens were becoming thinner and thinner by the day. People were dying of starvation and stuff like that. So they all approached the king and said, King Prithu, you are our protector. You're supposed to be taking care of us. And look at us, we've become so thin, we've become emaciated, our families are dwindling. And our lives are at risk. And if this continues, then we'll also die pretty soon. We'll die of starvation or otherwise. So please help us. Please help us. So they were in despair. So this caused King Prithu to become even more, committed to taking care of his citizens. I mean, he was already doing everything he could, but he was also trying to figure out, what is the root cause for this? Why is this happening? It's not that I'm being irreligious. Usually, when the situation is such where the king is irreligious, or the right religious principles are not being followed, that's when all of these bad omens take place. You have disasters like cyclones and tornadoes and earthquakes and fires and all of these things that happen, right? So those are the kinds of things that happen. But in a kingdom where the king, like Maharaj Prithu, was so perfect in terms of his religious principles, there was a famine. And people, it was pervasive. It was throughout his kingdom. And you're not talking about a small area. You're talking about a very, very large area right on this planet. And in that area, you can imagine how many millions and millions and millions of people are living. And like I said, it's not only about human beings, we're talking about innocent animals as well. Right? So that angered Prithu quite a bit, thinking, this is all happening because Mother Earth is not giving us what we need. She's not giving us the grain. So he immediately took his bow and arrow out, and he was taking aim. And Mother Earth, realizing what Maharaj Prithu was about to do, she got scared, and she took a form of she basically the personified form of Mother Earth started to run away from Maharaj Prithu. But Maharaj Prithu was fast, and he was chasing her, and everywhere she went, he was just right behind her, about to kill her. So at one point, she even transforms herself into a cow, thinking that if I become a cow, then Maharaj Prithu, being Maharaj Prithu, being a part of a very, very religiously inclined, kinship, that he would stop what he was going to do, and he would actually, take care of her. But instead, even then, Maharaj Prithu chased her and chased her and chased her, and to a point that at one she realized that there was no point of escaping. She was beyond that. And therefore, she turned around to Maharaj Prithu and said, Maharaj Prithu, why are you doing this? With folded hands, she then asked Maharaj Prithu, why are you doing this? Please don't do this to me. I have done no wrong. And, and then she starts to offer wonderful prayers. I mean, in the Bhagavatam in Canto 4, there's a beautiful description, of several verses where she glorifies Maharaj Prithu, recognizing him as the Lord himself, as an expansion of the Lord, and saying, you're the Lord, you're the Supreme Personality. You are the source of all creation, and she offers these beautiful prayers. But Maharaj Prithu is so angered by them. I mean, he's in a total state of, I want to kill you because you haven't taken care of you've disobeyed my orders, and I have not been able to provide anything for my poor citizens, and you are responsible for that, right? You haven't given me the grains. So after all of this, Mother Earth turns to him and says, okay, I have the seeds, but I have kept these seeds hidden from the general use. That's because people have been abusing me. There have been a lot of people who abuse the grains that I've given them. They haven't followed religious principles. So things have been really, really bad in pockets of your kingdom, and therefore that has basically put a burden on what my responsibility is as Mother Earth, and therefore I've kept those within me. I've hidden them from plain sight, and I haven't given them to anybody else. Okay. So Maharaj Prithu ordered her. He said, okay, fine, now you do what you have to do, but you have to. And then she said, then mother turns to him and says, even if I give you the grains, they're not going to work, because the grains I've kept them have been within me for so long, they've actually deteriorated, right? The quality of these grains has gone down. So then now that this has happened, there's only one way we can bring it back to life. And then she gives him, so there's a beautiful suggestion she gives them. She says, since I took the form of mother cow, I can give you the milk that will, rejuvenate, that will bring to life these seeds and actually restore, the food grains the way they're supposed to be. And so she says, but for that to happen, you need to make sure that there is a suitable calf, and there is a suitable milkman, and there is a suitable pot to collect the milk. So when I see the suitable calf, I'm going to be so desirous of giving milk to the calf, and if the milkman, who is also a very capable milkman, can milk me at that time, right? Can collect that milk in this pot that is also of significance, then that milk can then be offered to, restore the food grains, the seeds. So then what happens then, basically Maharaj Prithu, finally he calms down and he's completely appeased by them, because, that's one thing. When a subject, or rather I should say, when an opponent or person who is on the other side surrenders, Maharaj Prithu, just like Lord Krishna, right? When we surrender to Krishna, he's completely with us. He's giving us everything that he can give us to get us out of that situation, right? And not just that situation, but even for our spiritual benefit that I'm talking about. Look at it from a spiritual perspective. So in this case, when Mother Earth actually surrendered to Maharaj Prithu, even though he was completely angered by what she had done, seeing the plight of his citizens, he was completely at peace at that point, because she had surrendered, and then she was willing to, give everything that she had to him. And so this was something that, kings in those days could ensure would happen, right? So when people would surrender, that is something that, they took notice of that. It was not like that they were being irrational. It was just because I was angry 2 minutes ago, I'm going to continue to be angry right now. I'm not going to forgive you. My ego is going to kick in, and I'm the king. I'm in power. I'm going to kill you, blah, blah, blah. No, none of that happening, right? But here, King Prithu actually calms down, and he sees the sense in what she's trying to do, and the purpose is served as well, right? Okay, so then what he does is King Prithu helped by going with the rules, then the conditions that Mother Earth set, and gradually, the great sages, the demigods, even the asuras transform their leaders. So, for instance, King Prithu actually transformed Swayambhuva Manu into this milkman, right? And he sent her, into the calf, and actually sent Swayambhuva Manu to Mother Earth as a cow, so that seeing him, the milk would start to flow, and then it could be collected. So things like that that Maharaj Prithu did, and gradually, the Brahmanas, the demigods, the asuras, even asuras, for instance, they sent Prahlad Maharaj, and who transformed themselves into calves. And seeing these beautiful forms, Mother Earth was also in a state where she could give enough and more milk, and she could be milked to a point where all the food grains could be brought back to life. So that was how it was done. So that's how, when you look at it, like we spoke about how prajayate iti praja. So that is a very, Prabhupada would quote this also many times. Prajayate, praja means basically those who are born, right? One who takes birth. And so Maharaj Prithu was completely responsible for the protection of all living entities, right? Everything that took birth. That includes even animals, not just human beings. So human beings, animals, trees, and every other living being, right? Living entity. And so it's the duty of the king to give all living entities protection. So Srila Prabhupada always said that, ignoring religious principles and promoting the slaughter of cows will actually cause catastrophic consequences. And we're seeing that even in day-to-day life. We're seeing that even today, we see these things happening around us. And, we can attribute it to many other reasons like climatic change and, this and this and that. But the bottom line is it all comes down to how good the leader is, how good the government is. In these days, we don't have kingdoms, but even the governments and how they perform and what the consciousness is. If they're not in line with practicing religious principles, and leave alone religious principles, even following what is right, then the situation is only going to get worse. And that is a characteristic symptom of Kali Yuga, right? And we're seeing that only getting worse and worse and worse and worse. So I'm not saying that all governments are bad. I'm not saying all people in the government are bad. I'm just generalizing this to a point where, there are these kinds of situations, these kinds of cultures that are nurtured over a period of time that actually are helping in terms of how this downward spiral happens and how things get worse. So it starts with us. Starts with us because we cannot. It's easier for us to control what we can control. That is us. We cannot control the government. We cannot control people around us, but we can control ourselves, right? So starting by understanding what these religious principles are, understanding who we are, what the purpose is in life, and if we can start to follow those principles and perfect them, then that would become an example for others, a living example for others. And slowly, the whole situation gets better and better and better. So it spreads. And when that spreads, then obviously when we take it to school, we take it to college, we take it to work, we take it to, as administrators, then the whole world becomes a better place to live in. And that's the goal, and that's what we need to strive for. And ultimately, it is, understanding that Krishna is the ultimate protector, and he's the one we need to surrender to. If we can remember that as a key takeaway, everything will be in order. Everything will be in place. So let me stop here and see. I know I'm gone 4 minutes over, but take a question or two. See if you have any comments. And again, my apologies. I wasn't able to get all my thoughts together today. It's just been a very, very hectic set of days. But I wish you all a very happy Janmashtami to you and your families. May you continue to strengthen your spiritual advancement on this journey that we're all together in. Let's continue to hold hands and let's continue to chant and really make this a better place to live in. Any questions? Any comments? A couple of them if we have some time. Lingaraj Prabhu, if I can take your permission. We started a few minutes late, so if we can spend a few minutes.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, Prabhu. I knew the first question was going to come from you. Thank you. Yes,
No,
Prabhu.
it looks like somebody else also spoke over me. So I will let that Prabhu or Mataji speak.
No, Prabhu, I think I unmuted you.
Okay. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisances, all glories to Guru and Gauranga. Prabhuji, wonderful talk. You touched upon a lot of points. However, the point that there was one point when you said, there is one God, and if we all believe in one God, I like that point very much, and I hear that point being made very often. But one thing that I feel is we need to apply some critical thinking, like Prabhupada would always say. If there is one God, what we believe from our viewpoint is that Paramatma is there in everyone's heart, all living beings, including, every atom. Yeah, that is the belief. But we need to do some critical thinking and comparison when others say there is one God. does that God live in every living being, irrespective of, he being a believer or non-believer or an animal or every atom? And if that fails the test, then we need to think, what are we, supposed to do with that sort of. Of course, in Srimad Bhagavatam, we are given that answer, but I was just wanting to bring that point out, Prabhuji.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much, Prabhu. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's why Prabhupada says, right? Like I mentioned earlier as well, that as long as people understand what that means and are following those religious principles, you may be a Christian, you may be a Muslim, you may be a Jew, you may be a Zoroastrian, it may be anything, right? But if you're following that to the T, if you're doing it right, even Hindus for that matter, right? If they follow you, but today even the so-called Brahmins among the Hindus are eating meat and everything, right? They're doing the worst of things, not just eating meat. They're even doing things that are we can't even mention on this call.
Yes,
right?
Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji.
So if people don't really do, like you said, you're absolutely right. We have to think critically. We have to think for ourselves. We need to introspect to see what is it that we're doing? Why are we doing this? People need to really take it seriously because everyone seems to be so caught up in, today, tomorrow, today, tomorrow, today. And so they're just caught up in those kinds of things. Let's get through this. Let's make the money. Let's retire. Let's do, all of these things that are so focused on this material situation that we're not thinking the big picture. We very, very seldom spend the time to critically think about the spiritual aspect of our lives. And that is so important. We just take it for granted, things will happen. Don't worry, we'll figure that out when we get there. Right now, I want to take care of this. And so we're so caught up in this material situation. And yes, Krishna's external energy is so powerful. Maya has, our mind share like crazy, right? That we don't even have to struggle. Even without struggling to think about it, it's gone. And then on top of that, we have anxieties that eat up our whatever remaining mind share we have. So at the end of the day, we're drained. We're completely drained, and we're not in a position to think critically. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Anyone else?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Sri Kishore Das.
Prabhu ki jai.
Prabhu, thank you very much. That was such a beautiful talk. You connected various things from past, present, and even the other sections of Srimad Bhagavatam, going to Prithu Maharaj and Vena. These connections are what really makes me so happy when I hear classes from devotees, Prabhu. Thank you very much for bringing those connections and shedding some light on that, Prabhu. Thanks a lot.
Shedding some light for myself to begin with, Prabhu. So it starts here. Thank you very much, Prabhu. And it's so amazing, right? When you read these, when you hear about these, you can relate. I mean, Bhagavatam was written so many thousands of years, at least written, right? And it was spoken so many times, even longer than that. And in spite of that, we see such practical applications, practical examples, real life examples practically, right? That we see even today.
Yeah, that is true, Prabhu. That is true. Bhagavatam's application is like quite wide, actually. I mean, even beyond our imagination, it can apply to any situation, basically. Yes, Prabhu.
And one can argue, one can say, "Oh, this is just a story. It's maybe symbolic." Or, people generally come up with all kinds of things, right?
Yes.
They can find 10 or 100 different reasons, but then at the end of the day, when you think about this very critically, as Radhakunj Bihari Prabhu was saying, right? When you think about it critically, is when you realize there is one message, and that message is surrendering to Krishna and accepting, the supreme power of Krishna, and we're just nothing but very, very, very tiny little instruments in his hands.
Yeah.
When we get that realization, can we even make any progress?
Yes, Prabhu. And basically, that surrendering to Krishna, what you have just mentioned, is given as the ultimate solution to all the problems. Yeah. Correct. Past, present, or future. That's wonderful, Prabhu.
Exactly.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prabhu. Okay, looks like everybody is getting ready for, and again, my heart goes out to everybody who's helped out yesterday, as well as will be, is working towards today and tomorrow as well, right? So this whole weekend has been extremely hectic for every single person. So my heartfelt thanks to each and every one of you, for giving so much back of your time and through your services, and helping the temple and everybody else, the fellow congregation members and devotees. So thank you so much for all of that. Again, wishing you a very, very happy Janmashtami. So I'm not going to keep you any longer unless you have another question. Let's, close this call. I know there's a lot of work to be done, and some of us are, trying to get on it as quickly as we could. So any other questions before we end this call? Going once, going twice, going thrice. Okay, good. Thank you again for bearing with me, and we'll see each other later today. Thank you again. Hare Krishna, Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.